Hi, and welcome to the RH Studio Vodcast. I'm Chris, and today it's an absolute pleasure to welcome HOYIN CHEUNG, CEO and founder of Remo. He is a bioengineering grad from UC San Diego, a serial entrepreneur who has started many companies and has finally had great success with Remo, which is a virtual networking platform, virtual meeting platform. And we're going to go through some questions today. It's great to have you, HOYIN.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here, actually.
Great, so am I. Let's jump into it. Number one, please tell us about your early life. Where were you born? What was early family life like for you?
Yeah, so I was born in Illinois, in the middle of the state, semi-small town. It was like a university town. My dad was a professor at Illinois State. So I grew up in, predominantly like Caucasian environment, very few diversity. I was like the only like Chinese kid, Asian kid, actually only other ethnicity aside from Caucasian in like the entire class.
Damn. When
I was growing up. So if it wasn't for me coming back to Hong Kong when I was 9, I probably would not have spoken Chinese.
Have you always been a confident communicator as you are now?
No, absolutely not. Like I was definitely very shy, more of a I wouldn't say introvert, but someone who is not super confident in my speaking abilities. Like it definitely took time, like a long time for me to like figure out like what works for me and develop my speaking style. Me going on podcasts as guest has definitely helped a lot.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, like doing a lot of virtual events actually built that confidence weirdly because you're doing it alone at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You went into studying bioengineering. Yeah. And I think in the early part of your career, you also had some financial experience.
Yep.
Where did the influence to go in that direction come? Was it your parents?
Yeah.
Were you kind of free to focus on whatever you want? Did it take a while to kind of carve the niche you were happy with?
Yeah, so my dad was a professor in biology and he really encouraged me to go into bioengineering and biotech. Like that's like the next thing. That's like, you should really, he strongly advised me to go in there. And that's what I had a choice between that or business. And then I kind of thought about it and I was like, well, it's probably easier if bioengineering doesn't work to then go into business, but not the other way around. So yes. I decided to take, funny enough, like getting a bioengineering degree is like way harder than getting a business degree because I had to spend all of my summers doing like summer school just to catch up on all the content. Like,
wow.
You have to study biology, chemistry, physics, and engineering. Like it's like 4 subjects basically that you have to have like some degree of knowledge over. And so it probably would take most people, if you didn't take summer school, like 5 to 6 years to finish it. To actually finish. So I graduated in 4, but so it's funny that I took the long route to get that the thought process of, I should do bioengineering first. Like it was the hard road.
For sure. Those are all my worst subjects. So basically I respect. What was the bioengineering life like? Do you have any sort of anecdotes from that time?
Yeah, I mean, bioengineering as I can share like my first job as a bioengineer. I was actually working for a stem cell research company, and their whole sort of hypothesis and goal was to extract stem cells from fat tissue.
Okay.
So I would drive this like white van that you would kidnap people in. And I would drive that white van to these plastic surgeon clinics that people would they would do tummy tucks, nip tucks.
Oh.
And it's like a tub of fat, like a literal tub of fat. I would collect the fat and bring it back to the lab and, do experiments with it. And also I would go to this like butcher, like up in the middle of nowhere and pick out pigs to basically extract fat from them. Like I would look at like their butt and I'd choose like which butt was more like fatter, you know? And then I had to choose it and I have to watch them slaughter it because I had to make sure that, they slaughtered the pig that I chose. So I was forced to watch them like clean the pig, flame throw the pig to burn out all the hair. Like it was like a crazy experience.
It sounds traumatic.
I actually was a vegetarian for about 6 months after that job, after I quit that job.
Word, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if that doesn't build character, I don't know what does.
Yeah.
You went into you went into entrepreneurial pursuits and started various companies. I wanted to focus on the most recent one before you started Remo, which was Riotly. You've mentioned in your social media posts that at Riotly you felt that it was perhaps unhealthy. There was elements of what you were doing with social media that were unhealthy, but at the same time you're very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, is there a contradiction there? Is there something to clear up? And what aspects of social media particularly were you referring to?
Yeah. So during Riotly, what I did a lot is I managed a lot of accounts like around Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So it was very consumer, very casual. And back in the day when I was already starting, I could already see the trolling and the sort of, I can already see like the trolling and sort of like the divisiveness that we see today. I mean, nowadays we look at it and it's kind of starting to become normalized, where we see this harsh polarization, the Trump era, all those things that happened. Right now we've almost like, yeah, it's like normal. But I really saw that and I didn't like where the direction was going, because people were in their own echo chambers and not talking to each other. And it became more of like clickbait and trying to stir up like controversy that you really don't understand what the other side is thinking. And everything is reduced to just like trolling words. And because anyone can type a comment, then that person almost doesn't have accountability over what they say.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a small user handle. The picture is probably fake. Don't know what it is. So it's like, what's the humanness associated with that?
Yeah.
If you're saying a speech at a seminar and someone said the same thing, raised their hand and shouted the same thing at you, would like everyone be like, hey, that's really rude. Yeah. And I see your face. I know who you are. And people don't do that in real life because that's just, from that's just not human. Like, it's not what people do. It's kind of rude, right? But people do that all the time on social media. And so that's where I was really frustrated with that, and where I started to see that. And also because like people just focused on the followers, it's a lot of vanity metric stuff. And I just didn't quite like that. I didn't like how things were being presented. On LinkedIn, what I try to do is I try to provide like advice, like mindset, share things that I feel that it's more from a professional capacity. Right. And I think that's quite different. And it's also not political. And it's a lot about like self-improvement, about sharing more of like family and stuff like that. So it's, for some reason, LinkedIn just doesn't go into the realm of Twitter and Instagram. Yes. In some way. So that's how I kind of differentiate it. So when I talk about social media, LinkedIn is sort of a little bit in its own world. And then Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, that's all kind of on this other side, I would say. That's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
I wanted to ask you about failures. You tried several businesses before you found a formula that really succeeded. What was your mindset like each time your business effectively failed or you stepped away from the idea? Yeah. Were there big lows mentally?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I don't have a formula yet. Second of all, like I'm only at a 50% hit rate. So that's not, sure win. And I think, any founder who says that they have a greater than 50% hit rate might be lying. So to answer your question, like to know when I stepped away on something was when I remember like I tried this one startup. It was like a watch rental startup.
Right.
Yeah. So we would have these collection of watches, and then we would, if anyone, it's like really nice watches, you know, APs, the Rolexes, you know, whatever, and you would kind of rent them. So it's kind of a little bit like Rent the Runway, but for watches and stuff like that, and I did a lot of like customer interviews, you know, did a lot of testing, and just really talking to people about it. And I think I kind of felt that thing failed was when I talked to enough people and people just weren't vibing with it. When you talk to them, they're not like excited. They don't, you know, they had a lot of concerns. And even though we were able to solve those concerns, like obviously like, oh, well, what happens to the watch, you know, blah, blah, blah. It just didn't really vibe. And there's a certain point where like you keep iterating, right? But there's a certain point where you iterate enough, like 3, 4, 5, 6 times and still not hitting. Then you're kind of like, this seems like an uphill battle.
Right.
Like it seems way too uphill. And so the way I see things is like, okay, how, like you give yourself a timeline and how uphill battle it is, because there's a lot of other ideas that are not that uphill. There's some ideas that are downhill. So it's all about like trying to figure out what are the downhill battles for you, because you only have a certain amount of time to figure it out. And I know like there's the next question is probably like, well, you know, some people are successful because they're very dedicated to the idea and they eventually figure out like, how do you know when is it that you should be really loyal to the idea versus not? And honestly, there is no right reason. There's no right answer for that, because it really depends a lot. Like it might have been the right idea, but the timing is wrong. Like for me to answer that question, you have to understand like more about timing, technology, your skills, your network, all that stuff, and take a step back and analyze all of that. So if it's too early, then the question is, are you willing to wait? And time is extremely valuable. So I think that's kind of maybe an initial framework at how to think about when you should give up on something or whether you should continue it. The other question was about lows. I think trying to figure out product market fit on anything is probably the most roller coaster experience that a founder would go through, because they're like, oh my gosh, I got this great idea. You talk to someone about it and then they shit on it and you're like, oh my God, this idea sucks. And it's just constant up and down with it. And when I see myself kind of doing something that didn't work, the way how I approach it is like, okay, what is the fastest way to figure out that this idea does not work? Because that is actually more valuable. And I would pay money to know that, actually. That's how valuable it is. Because if you keep on stirring and trying to figure it out and it really doesn't work, it's a waste of time and it's a waste of your energy. Because as a startup or anyone who's trying to push something up the hill, like you don't have unlimited stamina or strength to push a boulder up a hill. That's just not true. Like eventually people run out of steam and they give up and they do something else. So you really only have that much in your tank. So you got to be really strategic about figuring out, do you use it up on this thing or do you save it up and try to do something else? And that's kind of also what I think about. And so when it does become low, but it's like, okay, I learned something. What did I learn from that experience? And being really, really honest about it. Like, what did I learn? What did I do wrong? And for some people that's easy, for some people that's hard. And asking people for feedback, like people initially will say that's a great idea. But when you come back to them and say, oh, you know what? I tried this and that. And then you ask them, actually, what do you think about this idea? They might tell you the truth. They might be like, you know what? I actually didn't like the idea. And you should ask them why. And then that initial sort of, I wouldn't say it's dishonesty, but white lie sort of goes away. And then you get to really narrow down on the why, which ultimately is what leads you to grow.
It's fascinating. People might assume that the Remo idea was to do with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But you started Remo way before the pandemic. What gave you the idea?
Yeah, so I've been doing remote work for a long time. Like before, when I started Riotly and all that stuff, I actually did remote work. My whole team was remote already. Back then, I just called it outsourcing. Like I was just, hiring contractors from, Philippines, from India, from everywhere. And then there was this concept of like, well, there's something called remote working and remote work management. And so I did that. And then I saw that there's a lot of issues with that, is particularly with connecting with your colleagues. Back then we were using Skype. There was no Slack. There was no Microsoft Teams. And so how do we create that connection? And so I tried to solve that by creating Remo, which actually was initially a virtual office product. And so just to kind of share briefly what Remo is, just to give everyone context, it's like a bird's eye view of like your office, so that you can kind of like see all the chairs and desks from the top, from the bird's eye view from above, and you double click on a table and you move on to that table. And so we were trying to solve that problem. And then no one bought it at the beginning. This is before the pandemic. Remote work was like a fringe thing. We even approached companies that were remote already, like fully distributed, and they didn't want to buy it.
Wow.
And so obviously that's a failure. Didn't work out at that time. And then I then saw an opportunity to work with, back then people did these things called virtual summits. It's like the precursor of a virtual event. And this is how bad it was back then. This is 2019. These virtual summits were pre-recorded videos, and you would buy a ticket, sometimes free, to go on this website, and they would release the pre-recorded videos at a certain time, and they would watch it.
Come on.
Like that's like I say this now, but that was only like 4 years ago, guys.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty bad. So I was like, why don't we do a sort of a virtual event, like where people come into this space and that you can give the talk. We talk about the whole thing. And I found this remote work virtual summit. I pitched it to the guy who owned it, and I said, let's do this. I'll do it for free. Yeah. I modified the product within like 4 weeks. And then we did it. And we had like 10,000 people go through the event across 3 days. It was pretty successful. And then I would follow up with people. I was like, hey, how'd you, like, my thought was, you guys now experience the product. So you should really want to buy the virtual office. And everyone was like, this is a virtual office product? I thought you guys do virtual events. I'm like, virtual events? I was like, yeah, I love the event experience. I felt I could connect with people. It was an amazing experience. I said, can I buy this for virtual events? I was like, we don't do that. But let me think about it. So then I thought about it, and then we ended up pivoting into virtual events. In August of 2019, we finished rebuilding the product for that. And then by March, we were about to launch on a deal website called AppSumo. And we started bringing in leads. And that was right when the pandemic started. So, yeah.
One of your headline sells is that through Remo, and I quote, online relationships are every bit as deep, meaningful, and enriching as an in-person relationship. Do you really believe that Remo achieves this today?
Well, not only Remo, but it can be achieved in general on online and the internet. I'll share some examples. And these are examples that I was inspired by. There's people who play World of Warcraft or Counter-Strike. Online, they play games. They don't even see each other's faces. No video. Just text. No, not even audio chat. Now you can with like Discord and stuff. You do audio chat. No audio chat. And they were raiding together. They were building clans together. They were working together in teams to conquer bosses and raid dungeons. And some people got married. They would come together. So the answer is yes, absolutely. It can be done. But it has to be the right environment in order to create that. The environment has to be right, but it can be done. There's evidence, and in fact, it's been happening for I would say it's been happening for a decade. So for Remo, we're heavily inspired by gaming, like online gaming, because if they can do it without video, surely we can do it with video. But then what I learned, what the key difference is that, like in gaming, you're working as a small team and you have a very clear goal. And so the collaborative juices and everything that's happening of experiencing something like raiding a dungeon, which has a beginning, a middle, which is super exciting, and then the peak, trying to beat the boss. You beat the boss. Everyone has a sense of achievement as a team. It's like literally like playing basketball, and you guys have that combined, united sense of fulfillment. That leads to creating a great experience that creates bonds. And so what Remo tries to do is try to replicate that in its own way in a very professional environment. So it could be networking. We have also games in here as well that people do. And it's basically about creating that experience so that people can talk about it. Hey, remember that one time that we did that, X, Y, and Z? That is what creates relationships and deep connection.
It's interesting you mentioned World of Warcraft. I've read articles how people have played World of Warcraft together in clans for years, and one member will pass away, and they will literally go to that person's funeral in real life. Like, and I suppose that's an illustration of it. So, yeah.
I think most people who see each other in person may not even go to their funeral in real life. They may not even happen to that. So I 100% absolutely agree. And because of technology nowadays, you've got teams that are co-founders or I have my CTO, for example. He lives in Dubai, and I've never met him in person, never. But he's my CTO. I talk to him almost every day. We have a great relationship. Like it's body language, all that kind of stuff helps, of course, the speed and everything. But there are other avenues in order to achieve that.
Obviously, Remo started as a virtual office product. I quote you as saying, remote work is unsustainable and dying. Your whole team works remotely, spread across 6 continents, and you've achieved success through that. Is there a contradiction there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I have to break down the remote work sort of world a little bit. I'm a huge proponent of remote work, first of all. Like the reason why I start remote work, because I believe it truly gives people freedom to do what they want, work where they want, work when they want. And it allows people to take care of their family while they do that, while they work. They'll make money at home. They don't have to travel. So it gives it's a very liberating concept. Now, during the pandemic, everyone has adopted remote work, right? So big businesses and all that kind of stuff, they all adopted that. The challenge, so that's one category. Startups and companies that are already doing remote work, they will continue doing remote work. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like remote work, hybrid work, people who are coming out of the pandemic that have offices. Are they still going to be doing remote work? I'll give you a good example. A friend told me that in India right now, they all used to do remote work during the pandemic. All the startups have stopped that, have told everyone to go back into the office, like without exception. So that's on the other side. That's really extreme from an Indian, Asian and Indian perspective, maybe. In the US, I think it's still trying to figure that out. But the main reason is that when you think about hybrid, so I remember back in the day prior to the pandemic, we would always say amongst this remote work community, you're either fully remote, distributed, or fully in person. Hybrid is the hardest to accomplish, the most difficult, because you have to create so many policies, so many rules. There's so many different ways of doing it. You have to, it's a lot of overhead for a company. And so all these companies have successfully done that. But if people still live in the same vicinity of the office and they're doing hybrid work, it's very easy for people to just go back into the office if the company requests that, because you're kind of like around in the same place. But for fully distributed companies, that's hard. So you can't do that. So that obviously you can't really like bring them back in. But for other ones, it's like you can. And the fact that like right now we're going through potentially a recession, a lot of the the pendulum of sort of employee versus employer power struggle about this remote work swung from employees and maybe swinging back into employers. Employers are now have a much stronger say because they're the ones that are cutting costs, doing RIFs, reductions in force. And that is probably going to determine what hybrid or remote work or whatever that is going to be in the future. And so I that's why I say it's not something that maybe like long term. But I would say though is that I think that there is a place for remote work, and I think that more companies are adopting remote work than before, and I think that will stay. But all of the excess companies, these other companies that have adopted remote work, they may sort of scale that back a little bit in order to what leaders feel is being more efficient, more collaboration. And that's the number one reason why they say that. Is that convincing? Don't know, but that's the reason. And as an employee, I think for a lot of employees, they may not have as much choice in this upcoming economic environment.
There's still a lot of demand for in-person events. Does virtual events have a specific demographic that you see, a key demographic, or is it something that might be more for the younger generation?
No, it's definitely from a general demographic standpoint, it's like very, very wide open because the pandemic has allowed everybody to understand how to use Zoom, how to use your camera, all that kind of stuff. So that was a huge technological adoption wave that's happened. And that's a huge technological adoption wave that's encouraged everyone to adopt technology. And so right now, there's actually no difference in demographic, really. What the difference is that the niche and when you use virtual events. So for example, like in big cities like Hong Kong or New York, you wouldn't do virtual events because everyone's around the city, right? So there's really no need for that. But if you have your audience is very distributed, your employees are distributed, your customers are distributed. I have customers that use our product for job fairs for a state in the U.S. because there's some organizations that organize job fairs for the entire state, but are students and people going to drive 1 hour just to go see a job fair? And then on the flip side, are employers going to go fly to there just for a job fair? And the answer to both those questions is no. It's not all the time, especially if you're in a smaller state or a state that not any of the coasts in the U.S. where the population is heavily more dense, but in states that are more sparsely populated. So there are very specific use cases that provide a lot of value.
You obviously differentiate by having a gamified experience, a fun experience that appears visually like it would be more attractive to younger people. Do you find that with the floor plans and interactive platforms that you have, less tech-savvy elderly people are just as comfortable within those environments?
Yeah, so our product has been refined a lot because of the pandemic. So if you think about it, the pandemic was a massive change for everyone. Everyone of all ages had to suddenly become more tech-savvy. So during the pandemic, we had to design it way more for the person that was 50 plus, like your parents, basically. So I do the mom test very frequently. And the mom test means like you just show the product to your mom, and if she can't use it, then you haven't done a good enough job. So and so we refined that product so that elderly people can use that. So I'll give you a really good example. So there was someone who was 65 plus that was attending an event, and what's crazy is that person had a stroke like a month before, and so he couldn't really interact and see things properly. And I was talking to him, and it was clearly that he had some form of ailment, and he was using Remo. And I was like, wow. And he said it's super simple to use. This is so simple. I get it. And to me, that also makes me happy that the product is not only simple to use, but people like him, it might not be that easy for him to travel for events. But he can participate in these events, and that itself, I believe, makes events very accessible. And Remo tries to do that. Is how do you make things as accessible as possible for people of all demographics?
Let's talk about hybrid events. I'm not clear on how in-person attendees and remote attendees can connect and form these relationships you talk about together at the same time. So, for example, does an in-person attendee have their movements, say, tracked through their phone within the event space? Is there perhaps a physical webcam, speaker, microphone, and monitor at every table that can bring the two platforms together? How do you enhance the experience for in-person attendees at hybrid events?
Okay, let me define a hybrid event first and just kind of share, like, just lay that out first. So a hybrid event is an event that you have in-person people that are attending the event. And the first sort of level of a hybrid event, or a simpler version, is you just broadcast that out, the speaker out at the same time. That's a hybrid event.
Okay.
The second tier hybrid event is you have in-person people and you have virtual people, and they're both kind of like in separate places and they don't interact with each other. So you could have a virtual event in Remo running in parallel with the in-person event. You have two teams, that's the second. The third one, which is basically, I've not seen anyone really do this very often, is you have these two events and they're talking to each other. Like virtual and the in-person are actually interacting. The short answer to your question is that this is incredibly difficult to do, and very rarely people do this. Extremely rare. Now, Remo has had customers that have successfully do this. There is a company in Arizona that does networking, and what they did was they had a space, and then they had these telephone booths, and they set up a computer, a huge LCD screen, and a camera, and people would go into the telephone booth and then talk to the other people there.
Nice.
And they will be looking at Remo, basically. And then they can move around and all that kind of stuff. And on Remo, they will have these telephone booths that would say telephone booth A, B, and C. And so if you wanted to go and talk to that but you don't know who's there. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's because it's like an anonymous sort of, it could be anyone, right? Because it's just a normal user. You don't know that. Now, that was relatively successful. It worked, actually. It actually worked. But the amount of preparation and education and everything in order to do that is very, very high. Very, very high. You have to buy laptops. You have to buy small laptops. Like, the amount of preparation you have to do is something that I don't think the average virtual event would do.
Right.
And there's scalability problems. Like, you can't do it for like a 1,000-person event. I've not seen anyone try to do something what you said, which connecting them in a way and tracking. It's not been done.
Let's talk about use cases. I noticed that there's a packed lineup of events upcoming on your website, all sorts of things, which anyone can sign up to. Really exciting. What are the most fast-growing genres of events that you're seeing on the Remo platform? And is there anything unexpected that's come out of that in terms of the types of subjects that you see people congregating around?
Well, webinars and networking is basically the most popular. People come together. They also do. There's some interesting ones that I've seen, like speed networking, like for date. Some of them is doing it for dating.
Okay.
That's an interesting use case I've seen. Other interesting use cases that people use Remo for are like they would create a escape the room experience inside Remo. So they would modify the floor plan, and you would go to different rooms, and then there's an actor in each of those rooms, all fully dressed up in whatever the theme it is, and they would go through a script, like they would pretend to be that character, and then all of us in the room would interact with that character, like ask them questions, figure things out, blah blah blah, and it's like you're playing like a live interactive video game.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that's been really cool. So we've got these really cool experiences. But yeah.
On that point, you know, some of the most popular games that are gamified experiences that have emerged is because the software owner allowed a modding community to come out of it. To what extent do you give people the freedom to sort of mod your platforms? So
luckily, the way how we've designed it is that people can do a lot of things to the space. They can put content in, there's call to actions, there's banners, there's you can move from, you can have one space, but then you can have multiple events running at the same time. So you can click on a link and it would go into a different space. So you can imagine like you can create like a map. This one intern did this. It was pretty insane. If you've played some video games where like if you play like the old school Zelda, like you would move your character into this one space and then there'll be a door on each side and then you would walk into the door and it would load up like a different space.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and if you took a step back, you can see all these rectangles representing different spaces and it's like a map, right? So one of my interns created that and did like a treasure hunt where you would go into all these different spaces and try to find treasure. And we have like a whiteboard, so you have to go into the whiteboard and look for stuff. Like there might be a link and then you have to click on the link to go on this website and you have to find something. And so it was really, really interactive. And all these elements were like, we never thought it was possible. It was our customers that came up with them.
Amazing.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about geographies. So Remo's obviously in San Francisco and Hong Kong, and you're now enabling events in over 100 countries. So really incredible growth. Tell us about the chronology of the geographies that you've expanded to over time. Did you target a certain region first, and how has that sort of progressed?
So far we're focused on the US and Europe, and then also Japan. That's kind of how it started. We started with US and Europe, and then Japan kind of came into the mix organically. And right now, yeah, those are the three areas that we're focusing on right now.
Okay. Now, can we speak about confidence in virtual environments? You're obviously a very confident guy. You explained how doing these calls and spending so much time on video calls, virtual environments has built your confidence. You talk about tips to get people to turn on their cameras. That's obviously very important to build trust, build relationships. Does willingness to turn on cameras differ across different geographies, different markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Asian countries tend to not be as comfortable. They are a little bit more shy, and they're also their background might not be appropriate to turn this on, and they might be in a very noisy environment. So there's a wide variety of reasons, I think, in Asia that it's just not typical. Funny enough, in Japan, they're a little bit more open to turning on their video camera, actually. Funny enough. So the answer is yes, culturally it is. It is more difficult to ask people to turn on cameras at the beginning of the pandemic, but now it's just a lot more, people are more comfortable. It also has to do with the way how you set it up. If you give people the impression beforehand that you will need to turn on your camera, then people may prepare for that. And people may try to, if they understand what it is that they're going to. So for example, like if I invited you to go to a gathering, but I didn't tell you what the dress code was, right? Then you just don't know what to do, what to wear or whatever. Like I need to tell you the dress code. I need to tell you what it's going to be like. Then you'd be like, okay, then I need to prepare myself, dress accordingly, stuff like that. We don't do enough of that online. We just think, oh, it's just a webinar, whatever.
Right.
So there's that sort of expectation setting that if you embed into the flow of your event or your meeting, you set the right expectations, then you get much better results for people who are willing to turn on their camera.
So through the Remo platform, does your data tell you that you have more success in getting people to actually show themselves as compared to other?
Yes, we do. Yeah. Okay. So our microphone and camera turn on rate is 3x higher than if you were to use it on Zoom or Teams. And the reason is because number one is the environment. Number two is we heavily nudge them to turn it on. And we also have a standard virtual background that they can automatically turn on. And so all of the objections to why they wouldn't, we try to address them ahead of time. And funny enough, a lot of these things aren't necessarily like the product itself. It's just doing a lot of the preparation beforehand that can actually help with that. And part of that's in the product, and part of that is just, communication.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about hardware. You mentioned in your LinkedIn posts that employers should consider giving stipends to their staff so that staff can invest in better audio and video hardware.
Right.
How important is audio and video quality with virtual events? Does it give some attendees an edge over others? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so let's talk about the stipend first. So if you're a hybrid company, fully remote, most of it is people are having calls through video, then I think absolutely you want to provide them with the right equipment, because it increases the rate that you're going to turn on your camera.
Okay.
Right? If you've got a background, you have the right. You have like a good equipment, like a decent laptop, or earphones or whatever it is, so that they feel comfortable. That helps people to be more engaged. So that's number one. And then number two is that in virtual events, if you turn on your camera, it's sort of like saying if you went to a physical event and you decided to walk in there with a cap really low down and a face mask, and you walked in and you're trying to talk to people. Does that seem like, and nowadays it's like people don't do that anymore. Like a lot of people are not even wearing their mask anymore. Does that seem very attractive or better to talk to someone like that? And even worse is that maybe they wear all black. You can't really see their body. Yeah. Is that someone that you want to talk to? Is that kind of weird? Versus someone who is wide open, very available. He's showing himself, like that element of showing yourself, and is really important, because you're saying to you, hey, I'm showing all I have. Like, I'm being transparent.
Yeah.
Because if you're not transparent, then it makes people feel that you're trying to hide something, even though that may not be the purpose. It might just be that you're just shy, but it's harder to build trust.
What's your take on virtual reality hardware, headsets, avatars, metaverse? Where do you stand on all of that?
Yeah, so it's funny because like when VR first came out, I was super excited about it. I got the VR headset, played around with it, and I think that there are a few companies that are doing VR, and I think they're doing really, really amazing stuff. But I think there's a difference between really niche things versus being available for everyone to use, like a mass-produced thing. And I think that that VR is improving a lot over time. It's improved a lot. My buddy Steve Zhao, actually, who's the CEO of Sandbox VR, which started in Hong Kong, but it's like an amazing VR
Fantastic.
arcade sort of thing, which is very successful. They've done a lot of great work where like now the headset's like wireless, and you can all be in the same place with that wireless headset, which is like huge game changer. So those type of niche things really make sense, and I think that would be successful. But for the average person that's going to use it, and to use it for such a long period of time, there's a lot of challenges with that, with dizziness, and being in there for a long time. And to me, one bigger challenge is that the concept of an avatar in VR, in my mind, I have some challenges with that being authentic in a human way. Because if the moment that you say, I want to be photorealistic, the human being is very good at spotting something that's even slightly fake, right? You've seen like these 3D animation, and it's kind of quirky, kind of weird, and you're like, I know it's an animation. So what that means is that if you're doing something photorealistic, it has to be 500, 600% realistic, like down to like the micro gestures and everything. And the honest, flat truth is that we're not there yet. And then if you do something that's like too cartoony, like what Facebook is doing and all that kind of stuff, then you don't really see the person really. Like it's an avatar in front, and that removes from, in my mind, the human experience. It detracts from it being authentic. And so when you're already having a video and it's already difficult to try to feel what that person is like body language, doing an avatar just I believe compounds the problem. So that's why I think there's some challenges with VR, in terms of like metaverse and all that kind of stuff. At least for work, for using it normally. However, for games, that's totally different ballgame.
Right.
Like Roblox is like a multi-billion-dollar company, Fortnite, all that stuff. But that's because it's a game. Once you're a game, all the things I talked about, like it's like out the window. Because you have a clear goal and you're doing something together in a very clear and collaborating in a very clear way. And so that for human beings is okay, because I'm interacting with you through not just interacting with you through like voice and body language, like a conversation. I'm interacting with you through a game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the key difference.
Let's move on to SaaS Tools, which you regularly post about. You talk about marketing hacks. Your company is obviously a paid for SaaS product, but you also advocate for switching to free SaaS tools to save money.
Yep.
That was a big reason why you cut your burn rate so famously.
Yep.
But I think you still pay for some SaaS tools.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there a free version for everything? Or are there some tools that you really, are really fundamental that people, can't avoid paying for?
Yeah, so I've been, talking about cutting costs because of the current economic environment. And so it's choosing free tools and then cutting costs on existing tools, or choosing cheaper alternatives. So the answer is like you can't find free tools for everything because you've got requirements and there's some things that you have to pay. So so for the free tool side, not everything can be free. So I'll give you a good example. Like we use a CRM called HubSpot, which we still pay for. And HubSpot's like one of the best CRM tools like out there. I think it might be even better than Salesforce. And it's so good that we just couldn't like not use it. But what I did was that I cut the cost on HubSpot by like 75%. Because then when I looked at the contract, I realized we were overpaying on a lot of things. One of them being, not overpaying, but we were paying for stuff that we just didn't need. So I'll give you one example. The way how HubSpot charges is they charge for seats, and then they charge something called for marketing contacts. Meaning like if I have an email and I want to send marketing information to that person, that's one email in your marketing contact bucket. If I removed it and I marked it as non-marketing, I don't pay for that.
Okay.
But I can't send them emails, right? So the marketing contact bucket was like some crazy number. Like I had 60,000 contacts, and I reduced it from 60,000 to 8,000. And that cut a lot of my costs. So I encourage like really diving deep into like this type of stuff to try to save money, and then also looking at cheaper alternatives, which, in our case for Remo, it is a paid tool, but we're cheaper than a lot of our competitors. And so that's why I push for like, this is how you could potentially like save money, reduce burn for this year.
I'm learning a lot from following you on LinkedIn, from the nuggets you put out there. One of the things that you advocate for is for people to read plenty of books, as many as possible. At the same time, however, you condense your advice into short form content on LinkedIn to help people learn. So short form content's never been so popular.
Yeah.
Is it really necessary for people to read entire books to learn? Is that efficient?
Yeah. So Naval Ravikant, I don't know. Do you know Naval Ravikant? Yeah, he's like he created an angel list, angel.co. I think he wrote something like says that you don't have to read the entire book, like you just skim through it. Ray Dalio from Bridgewater, you know Ray Dalio. He does something very similar. He basically just chooses the places that he wants to read and just reads that part. Like he goes through the table of contents and just picks the chapters that he wants, and then that's it. And so my what I would say is like you don't have to read everything. Just read the things that you're interested in right now and relevant to you, and absorb those information well is I think probably the best way these days to read. Or maybe use ChatGPT and try to create a summary.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about your values. You regularly mention that the values of teams need to align, and how important it is to hire people who are smarter than you, which is great advice. Have you learned from experience that way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm the type of person who I really like to get into details and like try to figure things out and stuff like that. And what I realize is that you can't figure out everything, and you need your team to grow. And also, when I started hiring people, I realized that some people were much better at doing certain things than I was. And that's when I started really focusing hard and trying to find people that were smarter than me and leveraging that and really trying to share the vision as to why, in terms of what we're doing in general. And that hiring people smarter than you is what makes a company really, really amazing and go beyond yourself, because a company in general is the average of everyone's abilities, really. Like, if you got someone who is a E player or D or E player, and you had tons of A players, for example, those few people will still drag your average down. And that's really important if you want to work on a startup where you don't have the luxury to have certain things not done well or executed well, because you have limited money, you have limited time, you have VCs breathing down your neck. So execution is really, really important. And so that's why I've realized you really have to narrow down on that and try to get people who ended up being smarter than you, so that the overall average is high.
You also have said that it's so important to have the courage to say no. Can you give me an example of a situation where you had to say no in the context perhaps of Remo?
Yeah. I mean, we had to say no to so many features. It's just so many features. I think I say no pretty much almost every day about feature requests, things that people want to do. And a lot of them might make sense. A lot of them are people have always didn't like the way how certain things about how we network and how things are. I'll give you an example. Like some people are saying, hey, I would like to have the table to be 10 people per table. So on the map, you can determine the table number, number of people that you can sit on the table. And everyone's like, I want a 10-person table, I want a 12-person table. And I have to tell them to say no, because actually the perfect number for people to come together and interact with each other is between 4 and 6. If it's more than 6, it becomes a large conversation. And in that large conversation, there's a bunch of people on Zoom and one person is talking. You're starting to talk to an audience, like a group of people. Like imagine you're in an in-person environment and there's a circle of 8 people. You're talking at people now.
Yeah.
You're not talking with. And people start to get, shy, because they don't want to speak up, and it's starting to become an audience. So 4 to 6 is typically the best number of people. And that's a good example of us constantly saying no.
You've always been a big fan of board games. Is that a family thing since you were very young? Is it a hobby you've always had? How do you incorporate that into the way that Remo works?
So it was not a family thing. My parents didn't really like playing board games. It was more like a hobby that I had with my friends when I was in college, going into now, and I just love playing board games because the way how you interact with people in general. Like say you go to a bar, you go to a restaurant, you hang out, and by the way, that's awesome. Like it's an awesome way to connect with people, all that kind of stuff. But once you play board games, it's a total different model of interacting with someone. They're competitive. You can work together with them. Like on average with a friend, unless you are working together on a project or a business or whatever, there's very few ways how you would interact with them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe you might go and say, hey, let's go play basketball together. And then that's like a different way to interact. But you don't interact with everyone like playing basketball. Maybe you don't play sports, whatever. So board games is like a total different way of interact with someone and knowing them in a different capacity. And it's also, as you might notice now that I talk about it, it's a shared experience that as a group, you try to achieve some kind of common goal.
Yeah.
So that's why I like board games. Yeah, I mean, I've got a huge collection. I always love playing and doing that with friends. And yeah, I love it.
You're big on non-work social interaction to bring teams closer virtually, like virtual team building activities. I couldn't get a clear example of how those types of games work well in virtual team settings. Did board games inspire those ideas in that way?
100%, yeah. Because board games is a simpler version than a video game, right? And so a lot of what board games do is they create some sort of shared experience and some sort of like peak in the whole experience, and people remember the peaks and the ending of things. So in Remo, what we've done is I've gone out and actually found, there's a few ways. Number one is I've found very simple online games that you can play together. Like there's this one game where this is simple things like charades, Pictionary, like telestrations. Like these are actually like board games that I then found the virtual version and then play with friends online.
Right.
And those are amazing because it's very portable. It's absolutely 100% portable. So online games is one. Second is you can also play like games, or not just games, but interactive activities as a group, like asking questions, like 10 questions, simple things like that. But opening up the right prompts of questions that enable deeper conversations, right? So we do have like a list of questions and follow-up questions that we have on these tables, and they start off pretty not that hard, very very easy to answer, but then it goes deeper into like, what was some of your toughest challenges in life, what was a very big emotional moment for you, and those things then just open up connection. And so it's a different way of tackling the problem by using shared experience, like sharing, but at the end of the day, it achieves a very similar goal of creating that shared experience.
I'd like to ask you about how you project your lifestyle on LinkedIn. So you show authenticity by accompanying your posts with images of perhaps your travel or your daily life.
Yeah.
But it seems a little random, like it has nothing to do with your work or what you're particularly trying to sell or advocate for. Why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a lot of people ask me that. So LinkedIn has an algorithm, and LinkedIn these days is starting to become more and more like Instagram in a sense. So what they value more now, they see more engagement on, is a post with a picture of yourself. And that ranks higher in the algorithm. So I'm trying to experiment and try to figure out what photos work better, And I try my best to try to align it with the content, but sometimes not every time we have the right pictures to align with the content. So sometimes it doesn't work as well. But there's one thing that I have noticed, that having a picture that has no connection with the content does better in performance than a post that does not have a picture at all.
There we go. Is travel a passion of yours? You seem to be traveling often. Is it a way to give a nod to remote working? And if yes, where is the most inspiring place that you've traveled to?
Yeah, I do like traveling. So I had a specific sort of circumstance, which was like a hack. So my wife was a flight attendant for Cathay. So that was that helped a lot.
Sure.
So I got some, more of a cheaper tickets through her. And so she would travel a lot, and then I would go with her, and she would invite me, and so we would go. We would travel a lot. So and she loves traveling, and me too. So for sure that is that. The second is, because our kids are not at a age where they're going to school, I am very excited to like take them traveling as well. And that's also pretty exciting, and also, it fits into the remote lifestyle. Probably the most beautiful place that I've ever been to is Bhutan.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the most amazing and most inspiring, innocent place I've ever been. Like, it's the air is cleaner, the water is clearer. It's just the whole environment is just really amazing. Yeah.
Let's talk about AI. I read a LinkedIn post where it appeared that you were somewhat opposed to AI, despite it being absolutely the talk of the internet at the moment. But on the other hand, surely you use AI quite widely in your business model. So can you sort of speak to that for us, clear it up a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I was talking about in the post was that AI has a tendency to, well, first of all, the definition of AI is that it's always trained on past data. That's the definition of AI. If it sees something it's never seen before, it has a very poor job of figuring out what it is. So I'll give you a good example. I'm sure like you've watched Netflix, or maybe you use some sort of Spotify music service or whatever. If you, like my wife, she always watches crime. Like, women love to watch crime, like serial killers, all that kind of stuff. So in her feed, it's all serial killers. Like, all, not serial killers, but they're all serial killer, like dramas, like documentaries, all that kind of stuff. Like, this person killed that, blah, blah, blah. And like, I was like, this one time, I think we were just watching a bunch of them, and you just got sick of like watching another serial killer drama. Right? You start to enter into the space of, I don't want to say emptiness, and I don't want to say boredom, but it's like you're just stuck in a room. And AI has a tendency to do that. You can see that in YouTube. You can see that on Facebook. You can see that everywhere, actually, the way how you interact with computers. If AI was so good, why would I still get some of my best recommendations from a human being?
Yeah.
Right? Because AI theoretically should be able to, AI, if it was perfect, it should theoretically be able to do that. So AI is still not really at that point. So coming back to like why I don't like AI is that when you talk about events and you do matching, you could see that there's some issues there. Right? It won't give you the serendipitous person that, oh wow, I can't believe I met you. It's just so it's based off of the past, right? And that's okay for probably, I don't know, 80, I don't know what the number is, 70% of use cases, but it won't do a good job to like create breakout experiences, breakout trends. Like, it would probably never be able to figure out Squid Game. That Squid Game is going to be this huge thing. Right? So that's the challenge with AI. I've yet to see anyone that, like ChatGPT and GPT-4 that was just released will have similar problems to this, because they're always being trained on the corpus of data of the internet that was based in the past, right? So maybe generative AI might be able to fix this like later down the road. That's yet to be seen. But that's why I think, in terms of AI, there's this challenge with that. Now, from what I was trying to point out is that that's good news for humans, because that means humans today still need to be curators at this high level. And you don't need to do all that, like that lower end busy work stuff at the moment. Yet to be seen whether that will truly be automated. But that's kind of what I'm seeing. So how do you survive in this new AI environment? Which is, you got to be more authentic. You have to create amazing content and really be even more thoughtful about the content that you're doing. Okay, you don't need to do any of the editing. You don't need all these things. You may not have to do. Then all of your mind and your the energy has to be focused on the higher level stuff, the highest level strategic thinking, which is, what is content that's really, really great for my audience? And so that's why I think AI is really pushing us towards, which is in some sense is a good thing. But it's definitely going to be a struggle for a lot of people that are trying to adapt in this new environment.
Just finally, I wanted to ask you about your leadership style. How has it evolved over time? And the final question I have for you is, what advice would you pass on to the next generation of leaders who want to be like you?
So my leadership style originally was being quite prescriptive. Like, I would tell people exactly how to do it. That style has changed to more of sharing what the goal is and asking more questions. More of like a Socratic method of asking questions and making the other person to kind of get to the answer, rather than me to just tell them what the answer is. So that's sort of my sort of journey of moving from my leadership style, and also being much more democratic, like asking for opinions and trying to collaborate more with people. Before, it was very, my point of view, and like, here's the thing, you should just do this kind of thing. So I've moved away a lot from that. And I think that's kind of how I've grown. And also like being way more patient and more, when I was younger, when I just first started, I was definitely more on the emotional side, where like, if someone couldn't do something, I'd be like, oh my gosh, why, how come you couldn't do it? And I would get really frustrated. I think now I've definitely been more mellowed out, and definitely have more increased empathy for people, and because before I was, working remote, like learning empathy, probably doing remote work probably isn't the most best place to learn how to be empathetic, because it's like you can't see, it's like very difficult. But one of the core things about remote work is that you have to be ultra empathetic to make up for the lack or for the difficulty of doing that. And so I think I definitely learned that.
Yeah.
For advice so I think advice for any startup entrepreneur, I think, because of AI, or being a creator, anything, the amount of busy work or the work that you need to do now to build something is going to go down. The amount of editing you have to do with all this new AI software, the ability to create websites, the no-code tools. Before, we really didn't have any of that. And so today is really, really simple and easy to start something. And the only thing that hasn't changed is an individual's ability to continue to work on it, or to continue to do it, or to just have the focus and the grit or whatever. So my recommendation is, like, it's super easy, and starting out and just trying and doing and creating stuff is like the first thing that you should just try to do and tinker, rather than think too much. Like, don't think too much. Just go ahead and just do it. And there's still a lot of people, even with all these tools, there will still be a lot of people that will try it and then give up for whatever reason. Like there's not give up, not as in like a bad way, but maybe they didn't have enough time, maybe they got distracted, maybe something happened in their life. There's just a variety of different reasons. So there will always be people who will stick through it, and that has not changed, and I don't think that's going to change, no matter how many tools you have, because if you're not willing to do the work to get up and actually record and do the basic things, then you can't create the long-term momentum that you need in order to be successful. Like I think there was like a quote that I read. You lay a brick, one brick at a time, and then after a while you see a brick wall. And that's the basic thing. You just got to show up and do whatever you need to do every single day, and eventually things will kind of come to it. And that is something that consistency is extremely hard to do. And I think that's actually pretty key.
Thank you very much for a fantastic interview. I certainly look forward to learning a lot more from you. Follow HOYIN CHEUNG on LinkedIn. Check out RemoCo. It's fantastic. And I appreciate your time for the interview.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. I had an awesome time. Thank you.